Sometimes the greatest fortunes come disguised as the heaviest burdens. The autumn wind rattled the corrugated metal doors of Desert Storage as Sarah Chen fumbled with a rusty padlock, her 8-year-old daughter Emma shivering beside her in the Nevada cold. Unit 47 had sat untouched for 3 months since her father's funeral, 3 months of unpaid rent notices and her desperate hope that inside might be something, anything, worth selling to keep them afloat. What she found defied explanation. 3 gleaming slot machines stood in perfect rows, their chrome surfaces reflecting her flashlight beam like mirrors from another era. The Stardust Casino logo blazed across each machine in faded gold letters, impossible relics from a world that had been demolished before Emma was born. But when Sarah fed a quarter into the nearest machine and pulled the lever, silver dollars poured out in an endless stream, each one dated 2031, bearing faces she'd seen only in the recurring nightmares that had haunted her since childhood. The same dreams where a man who looked exactly like her father whispered warnings about choices that could reshape destiny itself. Who was her father, really, and why did these impossible machines feel like they'd been waiting specifically for her to find them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hand trembled as she caught the silver dollars, their impossible weight cold against her palm. The dates shouldn't exist. 2031 was still 8 years away, yet here they were, solid and real, each one bearing the portrait of strangers who felt familiar in a way that made her stomach clench with recognition. "Mummy, are we rich now?" Emma's voice cut through the mechanical whirring of the slot machine, which continued dispensing coins with clockwork precision onto the concrete floor. "I don't know, baby." Sarah's throat felt tight. She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe this windfall would solve everything. The overdue rent, Emma's school supplies, the mounting medical bills from her father's final weeks in the hospital. But something about these machines felt wrong, like finding a pot of gold in a graveyard. She knelt beside her daughter, studying one of the coins under her phone's flashlight. The face etched into the silver was a woman, maybe 40, with kind eyes and graying temples. Sarah had seen those exact features in her dreams. The woman standing in a laboratory, warning her about doors that shouldn't be opened. The nightmare always ended the same way, her father's voice calling her name from somewhere she couldn't reach. "We need to go." Sarah stuffed a handful of coins into her purse and grabbed Emma's hand. "We'll come back tomorrow when it's light." But as they hurried toward the storage unit's entrance, Emma stopped. "Mummy, look!" Sarah followed her daughter's gaze to the back wall, where her flashlight beam had caught something she'd missed in her shock over the slot machines. A pegboard hung there, covered in photographs and newspaper clippings connected by red string like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Her father's careful handwriting filled index cards pinned between the images. Her breath caught. The photographs showed the same faces from the coins, the woman with graying temples, a stern-looking man with a military bearing, a younger woman whose smile seemed familiar. But these weren't the formal portraits from the silver dollars. These were candid shots, surveillance photos taken from a distance. Her father had been watching these people. Sarah Chen. Probability, 73.2%, read one card beneath a photo that made her blood freeze. It was her own face, taken recently outside the hospital where she worked. She didn't remember seeing her father there, didn't even know he knew where she worked. They'd spoken maybe 6 times in the past decade, stilted conversations about Emma's birthday or awkward holiday calls. "What does probability mean?" Emma asked, sounding out the word carefully. Sarah's mind raced. Her father had always been obsessive about numbers. She remembered him from her childhood, hunched over ledgers and calculators, muttering about patterns and percentages. She'd assumed it was just his work as an accountant, but this looked like something else entirely. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Unit 47 compromised. "Move the merchandise. Trust no one. D." The message had been sent 4 minutes ago. "We need to leave. Now." Sarah grabbed Emma's arm, but her daughter was already at the slot machines, reaching for the coins scattered on the floor. "Can I keep one? Just one?" Sarah was about to say no when she heard it, the rumble of vehicles approaching in the distance. Her father's storage facility sat on the outskirts of Reno, surrounded by desert scrubland. At 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, there shouldn't be anyone else here. She killed her flashlight and pulled Emma behind the middle slot machine, just as headlights swept across the unit's open doorway. Two black SUVs came to a stop outside, their engines idling. Car doors slammed, followed by the sound of footsteps on gravel. "Unit 47, a man's voice called out. "Federal agents, we need to speak with you." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Federal agents? She pressed her hand over Emma's mouth, feeling her daughter's scared breath warm against her palm. Through the gap between slot machines, she watched shadows move outside the storage unit. "Mrs. Chen, we know you're here. Your car is in the parking lot. We just want to talk about your father's property." They knew about her father. They knew about the storage unit. How long had they been watching? Emma's small hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing tight. Sarah thought about the silver dollars in her purse, the impossible dates, the faces from her dreams. She thought about her father's voice in those nightmares, warning her about choices that could change everything. The footsteps were getting closer. Whatever her father had really been, whatever he'd done, he'd left her more than just a storage unit full of mysteries. He'd left her a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark, not knowing if the next step would save her or destroy everything she'd tried to build for Emma. The beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness outside, searching. The flashlight beam swept closer, its harsh white light cutting through the gaps in the storage unit's metal siding. Sarah held her breath, feeling Emma's small body trembling against hers as they crouched behind the slot machine. The mechanical whirring had finally stopped, but she could still hear the soft tinkle of coins settling on the concrete floor. "Mrs. Chen, we're not going away." The man's voice was closer now, maybe 10 feet from the entrance. "We know about the machines. We know what your father told you." But that was just it. Her father hadn't told her anything. 8 years of barely speaking, and now these federal agents thought she was part of some conspiracy? The absurdity would have been laughable if not for the terror clawing at her chest. Emma's breathing was too loud in the silence. Sarah pressed her daughter closer, remembering all the nights she'd held her like this during thunderstorms, whispering that everything would be okay. She'd built their entire life on that promise, that no matter what happened, Mommy would keep her safe. The apartment might be cramped and the walls thin enough to hear Mrs. Rodriguez's telenovelas next door, but it was theirs. Emma's drawings covered the refrigerator, her homework spread across their tiny kitchen table every night, while Sarah helped her with math problems between double shifts at the hospital. "Check the unit." A woman's voice this time, crisp and authoritative. Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about tomorrow's routine that now felt like a lifetime away. Emma's alarm set for 6:30, just enough time for cereal and a quick braid before the school bus. Sarah's own alarm for 7:15, shower, coffee, scrubs that never seemed to get completely clean, no matter how much bleach she used. The drive to Mercy General, where she'd spend 12 hours on her feet, checking on patients who reminded her too much of her father in those final weeks. Mrs. Patterson with her oxygen tank and sharp tongue hiding the fear in her eyes. Mr. Williams, who called for his dead wife every night around 2 a.m. The endless paperwork, insurance forms, families asking questions she couldn't answer about why their loved ones had to suffer. She'd chosen nursing because she wanted to help people, but somewhere along the way, it had become just survival. Paycheck to paycheck, shift to shift, always calculating. Rent plus groceries plus Emma's school supplies minus the overtime she might get if someone called in sick. The math of a single mother's life. Every number representing something Emma needed that Sarah couldn't quite afford. The beam of light played across the pegboard on the back wall. If the agents saw those photographs, those impossible surveillance shots of people who apparently didn't exist yet. "Footprints in the dust," the woman called out. "Recent, she's been here." Sarah bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood. She thought about the college fund she'd been building for Emma, $20 at a time when she could spare it. At this rate, Emma would be lucky to afford community college. Sarah had dropped out of her bachelor's program when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, trading her dreams of becoming a nurse practitioner for the reality of night classes at the local technical college while working at a diner. She told herself it was temporary, that she'd finish her degree someday, but someday had a way of stretching into never. "They're not here," the man said, his footsteps moving away from the entrance. "Car's cold. They've been gone at least an hour." Sarah frowned. That wasn't right. They'd only been here 20 minutes, but she wasn't about to correct federal agents while hiding behind stolen casino equipment. The woman spoke again, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Set up surveillance on the apartment. Chen's got nowhere else to go. Single mother, works at Mercy General, kid in 3rd grade at Desert Winds Elementary. She'll surface." They knew everything about her life. The realization hit like ice water. These people had been watching her long before tonight. How long? Since her father died 3 weeks ago? Since Emma was born? The surveillance photo on the pegboard suggested it went back even further. "What about the daughter?" the man asked. "Collateral damage if necessary. The project takes priority." Emma's grip on her hand tightened, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not fear now, but a cold fury she recognized from the night Emma's father had walked out, claiming he wasn't ready for the responsibility. The same feeling from every time some doctor or bureaucrat talked over her head about her father's care, as if being a nurse made her less qualified to advocate for her own family. The voices faded as the agents moved back toward their vehicles. Engines started, gravel crunched, and slowly the desert quiet returned. But Sarah didn't move, didn't dare breathe normally, until the sound of the SUVs disappeared entirely. When she finally stood, her legs shaky from crouching, Emma looked up at her with eyes too old for 8 years. "Mummy, what's collateral damage?" Sarah stared at the slot machines, at the silver dollars scattered on the floor, at the pegboard full of secrets her father had never shared. Tomorrow's routine, the alarm clocks and homework and hospital shifts, suddenly felt like a luxury she might never have again. "It means they think we don't matter, baby. But they're wrong." Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands, the screen's blue glow casting eerie shadows across the storage unit. No signal, of course. The facility sat in a dead zone between cell towers, something she'd cursed about earlier but now felt grateful for. If the agents were monitoring her calls, at least they couldn't track her here. "Mommy, I'm scared." Emma's voice was small in the darkness. "I know, baby. Me too." Sarah tucked a strand of Emma's hair behind her ear, the gesture automatic after 8 years of motherboard. "But we're going to figure this out." She turned her flashlight back on, keeping the beam low as she approached the pegboard. Her father's handwriting covered dozens of index cards, neat and methodical as she remembered from childhood when he'd help her with math homework. But these weren't accounting ledgers or tax forms. These were surveillance reports. Subject 7, Alpha. Probability manipulation successful. Timeline shift, 2.3 days. Subject 12, Beta. Rejected the intervention. Probability cascade failure. Her own photo stared back at her from the center of the board, connected by red string to images of the slot machines, newspaper clippings about lottery winners, and what looked like medical records. Her medical records. Sarah's hands trembled as she read her father's notes about her childhood nightmares, her probability sensitivity, her inherited quantum resonance patterns. None of it made sense, but the clinical detachment in his writing made her stomach turn. He'd been studying her like a lab rat her entire life. Emma tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy, look at this one." The photo Emma pointed to showed a man in his 50s standing outside what looked like a government building. The same face from one of the silver dollars, but this surveillance shot was dated last month. Her father had written beneath it, Director Morrison, Project Stardust Oversight, eliminate probability 67.8%. Eliminate. Sarah's blood went cold. Her phone suddenly buzzed, impossible since she had no signal. The same unknown number, Sarah. Your father left instructions. Basement level behind the water heater. Code, Emma's birthday. Trust me. D. She stared at the message, then at the machines humming softly in the darkness. The middle slot machine's display was still lit, showing 3 cherries in a row, the jackpot configuration that had started this nightmare. Mommy, who's D? Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her own number, which was impossible since she was holding her phone. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the green button. Sarah. The voice was her father's, unmistakable despite the static. If you're hearing this, I'm already dead, and they found the machines. Emma gasped, pressing closer to Sarah's side. Her father had been dead for 3 weeks. She'd stood at his graveside, watched them lower the casket into the desert soil. I know you have questions, the voice continued. I know you're angry, but you need to listen carefully because your life and Emma's depend on it. The machines aren't just slot machines, they're probability engines. They can show possible futures, manipulate quantum outcomes. The government's been using them for decades to control everything from elections to stock markets to wars. The line crackled, and Sarah heard what sounded like gunshots in the background. The coins you found aren't random. They're showing you people whose probability threads intersect with yours. People who can help you or people who will try to kill you. The dates on the coins indicate when these intersections will occur. Sarah looked down at the silver dollars scattered around her feet, their impossible future dates glinting in the flashlight beam. I spent 20 years trying to expose Project Stardust, and they've spent 20 years trying to silence me. Now they want the machines back, and they'll do anything to get them. But Sarah, and this is important, you have a choice they're terrified you'll make. The recording paused, filled with static and distant voices shouting orders. The machines respond to people with quantum sensitivity, people like you, like Emma. You can use them to change probability itself, to alter the timeline, but every change has consequences. Save one life and another might be lost. Prevent one tragedy and create another. Emma was crying now, soft hiccups that broke Sarah's heart. This was too much for an 8-year-old to process. Hell, it was too much for anyone to process. The basement coordinates are in my final ledger, hidden behind the water heater at your apartment. But Sarah, once you go down that path, there's no going back to your normal life. They'll never stop hunting you. The line went dead, leaving them in silence, broken only by the soft mechanical humming of the slot machines. Sarah stared at her phone's blank screen, feeling the weight of the choice her father had described. She could walk away right now, take Emma home, pretend none of this had happened, return to their routine of homework and hospital shifts, and slowly saving for a future that might never come. Or she could step into the unknown, following clues left by a dead man who'd never bothered to call on her birthday. Mommy? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. What are we going to do? Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at her phone's black screen. The weight of her father's words hung in the air like smoke, choking her with possibilities she didn't want to consider. Emma's tear-streaked face looked up at her, waiting for an answer Sarah didn't have. I don't know, baby. The admission tasted bitter. She'd built their entire life on being the one with answers, the one who could fix everything with enough planning and determination. Band-aids for scraped knees, solutions for homework problems, explanations for why Daddy couldn't visit anymore. But this was beyond anything she could wrap around. She looked at the slot machines, their chrome surfaces reflecting her flashlight beam like accusatory eyes. 20 minutes ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could sell whatever junk her father left behind for enough money to cover Emma's school shoes. Now federal agents were hunting them. Her dead father was calling her phone, and apparently she had the power to alter reality itself. The rational part of her mind, the part trained in evidence-based medicine and clinical thinking, insisted this was all some elaborate hoax. Coincidence and paranoia mixing with grief to create impossible scenarios. Dead men didn't leave voicemails. Slot machines didn't dispense silver dollars from the future. Federal agents didn't lurk in desert parking lots waiting to snatch single mothers and their 8-year-old daughters. But Emma had heard the voice too. Emma had seen the coins, touched the machines, and those surveillance photos on the pegboard. Sarah's father had known things about her life that he couldn't have known from their occasional stilted phone calls. Her work schedule, Emma's school, details that required watching and planning. "Mommy, my tummy hurts." Emma pressed her hand to her stomach, the same gesture she made when anxiety overwhelmed her, usually during thunderstorms or parent-teacher conferences where other kids had both parents showing up. Sarah gathered her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. This was what mattered, not mysterious government conspiracies or probability engines or whatever delusion her father had been living. Emma needed stability, safety, a mother who made rational decisions based on facts rather than fear. "We're going home," Sarah decided, her voice steadier than she felt. "We'll pretend we never came here. Tomorrow you'll go to school, I'll go to work, and everything will be normal again." But even as she said it, she thought about the agent's words. Set up surveillance on the apartment. She'll surface. Going home meant walking into a trap. And what had that woman said? Collateral damage if necessary. Sarah's stomach churned. She'd spent 8 years shielding Emma from every harsh reality, explaining away her father's absence with gentle lies, working double shifts so Emma never had to worry about money, creating a bubble of security in their cramped apartment. Now that bubble was disintegrating, and she had no idea how to protect what was left. "But what about the bad people?" Emma whispered. "They said they'd hurt us." The innocence in her daughter's voice nearly broke Sarah's resolve. Emma still believed her mother could fix anything, could keep her safe from any threat, but Sarah was just a nurse from Reno who could barely afford their rent. She wasn't equipped for government conspiracies or quantum probability manipulation or whatever nightmare her father had dragged them into. Her phone buzzed again. Another impossible message from the mysterious D. Basement coordinates, 39.5296 degree N, 119.8138 degree W. 24 hours before they triangulate this location. Emma's gift is stronger than yours. They know this. Emma's gift. Sarah stared at her daughter, remembering all the times Emma had known things she shouldn't. When the phone would ring before it happened, which route to take home when traffic was backing up, which patients at the hospital were going to take a turn for the worse. Sarah had always dismissed it as coincidence or childhood intuition, but now, "I don't want to be special," Emma said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I want to go home and watch cartoons." Sarah's heart ached. This wasn't fair. Emma deserved a normal childhood, not whatever twisted legacy her grandfather had left behind. She deserved soccer practice and sleepovers and worrying about nothing more serious than book reports and playground drama. The slot machines hummed their mechanical lullaby, patient and waiting. Sarah looked at the silver dollars scattered on the floor, each one showing faces of people she'd never met, but somehow recognized. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Once you go down that path, there's no going back to your normal life." But what if normal life was already gone? What if the choice wasn't between safety and danger, but between fighting and surrender? "Mommy?" Emma's voice was getting smaller. "Are we going to be okay?" Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down like a physical force. Whatever she chose in the next few minutes would determine everything that came after. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Emma's face was pale in the flashlight beam, but her eyes held that same knowing quality they'd had since she was a toddler. The same look she'd given Sarah the morning before the phone call about Grandpa's death, when she'd quietly asked if they should make extra pancakes for when we're sad later. "No, baby," Sarah said softly, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "We're not going to be okay if we keep pretending this isn't happening." She stood up, her legs unsteady but her resolve crystallizing. The rational part of her mind screamed in protest, but she silenced it. Rational thinking had kept her safe for 38 years, but safety was an illusion now. The agents knew where they lived, where Emma went to school, where Sarah worked. Normal life wasn't an option, it was a death trap. "What do you mean?" Emma whispered. Sarah walked to the pegboard and unpinned her own surveillance photo. Her father's handwriting in the margin read, "Subject demonstrates Category 3 probability sensitivity. Unconscious precognitive episodes documented since age 6. Below that, in red ink, Emma, Category 5, unprecedented potential." Her hands shook as she folded the photo and slipped it into her pocket. Evidence of a life she'd never known she was living, watched and catalogued by a father who'd chosen his secrets over his family. But also proof that Emma's strange intuitions weren't just coincidence. They were something far more dangerous. "Remember when you told me not to take Highway 80 to work last month?" Sarah asked, gathering the scattered silver dollars from the floor. "The day that truck jackknifed and blocked traffic for hours?" Emma nodded, her thumb finding its way to her mouth, a nervous habit she'd mostly outgrown. "And when you said Mrs. Henderson from 3B was going to fall down the stairs 2 days before it happened?" Another nod, smaller this time. Sarah knelt in front of her daughter, coins warm in her palms. "You always known things, haven't you? Things that haven't happened yet?" "It makes my head hurt," Emma admitted. "Like looking at the sun, but inside my brain." The simple, honest answer hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her 8-year-old daughter had been carrying this burden alone, probably thinking she was crazy or broken. Just like Sarah had felt during her own childhood nightmares, dreams of disasters that came true days later, visions that made her parents worry enough to schedule therapy appointments they couldn't afford. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, pulling Emma close. "I should have listened. I should have known." But she had known, hadn't she? Some part of her had always recognized the signs, the same gift her father's note said she possessed. She'd just been too afraid to acknowledge it, too invested in maintaining their carefully constructed normal life. Sarah stood and approached the middle slot machine, the one still displaying 3 cherries. Her reflection stared back from its chrome surface. A tired single mother in scrubs and sneakers, her practical ponytail coming loose after 12 hours at the hospital. This morning, she'd been planning Emma's birthday party, wondering if she could afford the bouncy house rental. Now she was contemplating, stepping into a world where the future could be seen and changed, where government agents hunted children for their abilities. "Mummy, what are you doing?" Sarah placed her hand on the slot machine's lever. The metal felt warm, almost alive, vibrating with some internal energy that made her fingertips tingle. She thought about the coordinates in the mysterious text message, about basement levels and water heaters and 24-hour deadlines, about the faces on the silver dollars, strangers who might help them or kill them, depending on choices not yet made. "I'm choosing the hard path," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "The one that might actually lead somewhere better." She pulled the lever. The reels spun with mechanical precision, but Sarah wasn't watching them. She was watching Emma, whose eyes had gone wide and unfocused, the way they did during her knowing moments. The humming of the machines grew louder, harmonizing into something that wasn't quite music but felt like memory. The reels stopped, 2 cherries and a lemon. Silver dollars poured from the machine's mouth. But these were different from before. Instead of future dates, they bore coordinates, dozens of locations scattered across the country. And instead of strangers' faces, they showed places: an underground facility, a library basement, abandoned warehouse, a farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. Emma blinked, coming back to herself. "Mummy, I can see them now. The paths. They're like roads made of light, and some of them lead to bad places, but some—" She smiled for the first time since they'd entered the storage unit. "Some lead to people who are like us. People who are hiding and scared and waiting for someone to find them." Sarah scooped up the new coins, their weight solid and real in her hands. No going back now. Whatever safety net their old life had provided was gone, cut away by her own choice. But looking at Emma's face, No longer fearful but filled with purpose, Sarah realized they'd been falling for years without knowing it. At least now they had a chance to fly. "Then let's go find them," Sarah said, shouldering her purse and taking Emma's hand. "Starting with that basement." The coordinates led them to the University of Nevada's oldest library, a brick building that looked like it had been forgotten by time and maintenance budgets alike. Sarah parked under a broken streetlight, her hands still gripping the wheel long after she'd turned off the engine. The weight of the silver dollars in her pocket felt heavier than physics should allow. "The basement's around back," Emma said quietly, pointing toward a narrow alley between buildings. "There's a blue door with a broken lock." Sarah didn't bother asking how her daughter knew this. The rules of their world had shifted fundamentally in the past hour, and questioning Emma's insights seemed pointless now. Instead, she checked her phone. 11:47 p.m. The campus was deserted except for the occasional security patrol, their flashlight beams sweeping across empty walkways like lighthouse signals. They found the blue door exactly where Emma had predicted, its lock hanging open as if someone had been expecting them. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the cold metal handle. Once they went through this door, they'd be following a path laid out by dead men and mysterious allies, trusting strangers who communicated through impossible text messages. "Together?" Emma asked, slipping her small hand into Sarah's. "Together." The basement smelled like old books and industrial disinfectant, with an underlying current of something else. Ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. Emergency lighting cast sickly yellow pools along a corridor lined with storage rooms and utility closets. Their footsteps echoed despite their attempts at stealth, the sound seeming to announce their presence to whatever waited in the darkness ahead. "Third door on the left," Emma whispered, then paused. "Mommy, there's someone here already. Someone who's been waiting for us." Sarah's pulse quickened, but before she could respond, the third door opened on its own, revealing a woman in her 50s with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a librarian's cardigan over jeans, looking more like someone's favorite teacher than a player in a government conspiracy. "Sarah Chen," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent Sarah couldn't place. "I'm Dr. Diana Volkov. Your father asked me to watch for you." The mysterious D from the text messages. Sarah instinctively stepped protectively in front of Emma, but the woman raised her hands in a peaceful gesture. "I know this is terrifying," Diana continued. "David warned me you'd be suspicious. But we don't have much time. They've been monitoring cellular activity in this area since yesterday. Once they triangulate our location—" "How do I know you're not one of them?" Sarah demanded, even as part of her desperately wanted to trust this stranger who might have answers. Diana smiled sadly and reached into her pocket, producing a silver dollar identical to the ones Sarah carried. But this coin showed Sarah's own face, dated 3 years in the future, "because I've been running from them for 15 years, and your father saved my life twice in that time." Emma tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "She's okay, Mummy. Her light is blue, not red." Sarah had no idea what that meant, but Emma's certainty was oddly comforting. Diana gestured for them to follow her into the storage room, which turned out to be much larger than it appeared from the corridor. Banks of computer equipment hummed against one wall, their screens displaying scrolling data streams and probability calculations that made Sarah's eyes water. "Welcome to what's left of the resistance," Diana said, closing the door behind them. "We call ourselves the Probability Underground, scientists, mathematicians, and sensitivity carriers who've refused to let the government weaponize quantum mechanics." She moved to one of the computers and pulled up a map studded with blinking red dots. "Project Stardust has been operational since 1963, using modified slot machines to manipulate probability fields for everything from stock market crashes to election outcomes. They've been breeding people like you and Emma for 3 generations, creating a network of human probability engines they can activate when needed." Sarah stared at the map, recognizing some of the locations from her newly acquired coins. "Breeding?" Your father wasn't an accountant, Sarah. He was a genetics specialist working for Stardust until he discovered what they really planned to do with the children they'd created. Diana's voice hardened. They don't want partners or employees. They want tools, human calculators they can use and discard. Emma had wandered to another computer terminal, her small fingers tracing patterns on the screen. The data streams shifted and reorganized themselves in response to her touch, forming new configurations that made the machines hum with increased intensity. Extraordinary, Diana breathed. Emma, can you see the probability threads on the screen? They're like spaghetti, Emma said matter-of-factly. Some are gold and some are black and some keep changing colors. The gold ones lead to happy endings. Diana looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. Category 5 sensitivity isn't just rare, it's evolutionary. She doesn't just see possible futures, she can actively guide probability toward preferred outcomes. Sarah's stomach lurched. You're talking about my 8-year-old daughter like she's a weapon. No, Diana said firmly. I'm talking about her like she's hope. The weight of Diana's words settled over the room like a shroud. Sarah watched her daughter manipulate streams of data with the casual ease of a child playing with blocks and felt something cold crystallize in her chest. Hope. The word carried implications that made her want to grab Emma and run, consequences that stretched far beyond their small life in Reno. Hope for what? Sarah asked, though part of her already knew she wouldn't like the answer. Diana's fingers flew across another keyboard, bringing up a new display, a 3-dimensional map showing probability cascades branching out like a vast tree. The Stardust Project has been nudging major events for 60 years, wars that lasted longer than they should have, economic collapses that benefited specific corporations, elections swayed by carefully orchestrated coincidences. They've been playing God with the timeline, and the probability field is starting to fracture under the strain. She highlighted sections of the map where the branching patterns looked diseased, twisted into unnatural configurations. Reality itself is becoming unstable. We're seeing temporal echoes, paradox loops, entire probability threads that lead to extinction-level events. Without intervention, the system will collapse completely within the next 18 months. Emma looked up from her screen, her young face troubled. The black spaghetti is growing, she said softly. It's eating the gold ones. Sarah's medical training kicked in, analyzing symptoms and searching for treatment options. What kind of intervention? Someone with Emma's level of sensitivity could theoretically reset the probability matrix, Diana explained, but her tone carried reluctance. Essentially rewinding the timeline to before the major manipulations began, allowing natural probability to reassert itself. Theoretically. Sarah's voice went flat. What are you not telling me? Diana exchanged a glance with Emma, who had gone very still beside the computer. The process would require direct neural interface with the quantum field. For someone as young as Emma, with her level of exposure, she trailed off. Say it. The success probability is roughly 67%. The survival probability is lower. Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. They wanted her to sacrifice her daughter, to save a timeline that had already been poisoned by decades of manipulation. The same people who had bred her family like livestock now demanded the ultimate price, wrapped in noble language about hope and salvation. Absolutely not. The words came out harder than gunshots. We're leaving, now. But Emma stepped between Sarah and the door, her small frame somehow seeming immovable. Mommy, I can see what happens if we don't try. The black spaghetti wins, and everyone stops being able to be born. Not just us, everyone. You're 8 years old, Sarah said desperately. You shouldn't have to make decisions like this. You should be worried about homework and playground fights, not saving the world. But I am 8, Emma replied with heartbreaking logic. And I can see the gold paths. There's one where I help fix the spaghetti and I'm okay after. It's skinny and hard to see, but it's there. Diana had remained silent during the exchange, but now she spoke quietly. There might be another way. Your father mentioned a fail-safe protocol in his notes, something about probability anchors. She pulled up another screen showing the original slot machines from the storage unit. Those machines aren't just random artifacts, they're prototypes designed to stabilize quantum fields rather than manipulate them. If we could modify the interface, create a distributed network instead of requiring direct neural contact. You're guessing, Sarah accused. Yes, Diana admitted, but it's a better guess than letting the probability matrix collapse on its own. And it would give Emma backup, other sensitives sharing the load. Emma had returned to her computer terminal, her small hands moving with increasing urgency across the screen. "They're coming," she announced suddenly. "The red lights, 3 cars, maybe 4, they found us." Alarms began blaring from the monitoring equipment. Diana's face went pale as she tracked incoming signals on her displays. "Federal vehicles, 2 minutes out. They must have traced our power usage." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, but every scenario ended in capture or flight. No time for careful planning, no opportunity to weigh options properly. The same impossible pressure she felt during emergency surgeries, when hesitation meant death and action meant accepting terrible responsibility. "The machines," she said suddenly. "If we're going to try this distributed network approach, we need to get back to the storage unit." Diana was already gathering essential equipment, her movements efficient despite obvious fear. "The tunnels connect to the old steam system. We can reach your father's location without surfacing, but it'll take 30 minutes through maintenance corridors." Emma grabbed Sarah's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "The skinny gold path," she whispered. "It starts now." Footsteps echoed in the corridor above, followed by shouted commands. Sarah looked at her daughter, still small enough to need a booster seat, still young enough to believe her mother could fix anything, and made the only choice that mattered. Lead the way. The ordeal begins. The maintenance tunnels beneath the university campus were a labyrinth of rusted pipes and forgotten infrastructure, lit only by Diana's flashlight and the occasional emergency beacon casting sickly red shadows on concrete walls. Sarah carried Emma piggyback through the narrow passages, her daughter's weight both comforting and terrifying, a reminder of everything she stood to lose. "Turn left at the junction ahead," Diana whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Behind them, the distant sound of boots on metal grating suggested their pursuers had found the tunnel entrance. Emma's breath was warm against Sarah's ear. "Mommy, the gold path is getting darker, like someone's turning down the lights." Sarah's chest tightened. Every step forward seemed to narrow their options, forcing them deeper into a world where her daughter's life had become currency in a game she barely understood. The silver dollars in her pocket clinked softly with each movement, their impossible weight a constant reminder of the choice she'd made in pulling that lever. They emerged from the tunnels into the storage facility's loading dock, where the familiar smell of dust and neglect felt almost welcoming after the claustrophobic underground passages. Diana's equipment bag scraped against the concrete as they made their way toward Unit 247, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. "How long do we have?" Sarah asked, setting Emma down on unsteady legs. Diana checked her tablet, its screen displaying tracking data that made Sarah's stomach clench. "Federal teams are systematically searching the tunnel system. Maybe 20 minutes before they reach this location." The storage unit door rolled up with its characteristic screech, revealing the 3 slot machines waiting in the darkness like silent sentinels. They looked different now, not merely relics from a demolished casino, but instruments of incredible power and terrible responsibility. Sarah found herself thinking about the steady rhythm of hospital monitors, how quickly that peaceful beeping could become the frantic alarm of a crashing patient. Emma approached the center machine, the one that had dispensed the coordinate coins. Her small hand traced the chrome lever with something approaching reverence. "It's scared," she announced. "The machine. It knows what they want to make it do." "Machines don't feel fear, sweetheart," Sarah said automatically, then caught herself. Nothing about their situation fell within normal parameters anymore. This one does. Emma's voice carried absolute certainty. It was made to help people see good futures, but they made it show bad ones instead. It's been showing bad ones for so long, it forgot how to make the good paths bright. Diana was already setting up her equipment, connecting cables between her computer and the slot machines with practiced efficiency. "The quantum resonance signatures match your father's specifications," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "If we can establish a stable connection network." Alarms began wailing from her monitoring equipment, proximity sensors detecting approaching vehicles. Through the storage facility's grimy windows, Sarah could see headlight beams sweeping across the parking lot, moving with systematic precision. "They're here," Diana said unnecessarily. "Sarah, I need you to understand. Once we initiate the protocol, there's no stopping it. The probability cascade will either stabilize or it won't. If it fails, everyone dies anyway," Sarah finished grimly. "You mentioned other sensitives. Where are they?" "Scattered across the country, most of them in hiding. Your father spent years building a network, leaving breadcrumbs for people like us to find each other." Diana's fingers flew across her keyboard, establishing connections to distant nodes. Emma would be the primary anchor, but she wouldn't be carrying the full load. Emma had climbed onto a chair to reach the center machine's lever, her 8-year-old frame dwarfed by the massive device. "I can see them," she said wonderingly. "The other people like me. They're scared too, but they're waiting. They want to help." Car doors slammed outside, followed by crisp voices issuing tactical commands. Sarah recognized the tone from medical emergencies, professionals moving with deadly efficiency toward an objective. "Mommy," Emma said, turning from the machine with tears in her eyes. "I know you don't want me to do this. I know you're scared. But the black spaghetti is eating everything, and I'm the only one who can see how to make it stop." Sarah knelt beside her daughter, memorizing every detail of Emma's face. The determined set of her jaw inherited from Sarah's own father, the gentle eyes that saw too much, the gap between her front teeth that gave her smile its distinctive charm. This morning, those teeth had been loose, marking another small milestone in the ordinary progression of childhood. Now they seemed heartbreakingly precious, reminders of a normal life that was already slipping away. "I should be protecting you from this," Sarah whispered, "not helping it happen." "You are protecting me," Emma said simply, "by trusting me to do what I can see needs doing." Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, heavy boots moving with military precision. Diana's equipment showed multiple heat signatures converging on their location. No more time for doubt or careful deliberation. Sarah placed her hand over Emma's on the slot machine lever, feeling the warm metal vibrate with barely contained energy. "Together," she said, the word carrying the weight of surrender and fierce maternal love in equal measure. Together, Emma agreed, and they pulled the lever down. The world exploded into light. The light wasn't the clean fluorescence of a hospital operating room or the warm glow of home. It was something alien and hungry, pouring from the slot machine's display like liquid electricity. Sarah's hand, still covering Emma's on the lever, felt the metal grow burning hot, then ice cold, then something beyond temperature altogether. Emma's scream cut through the mechanical whirring of the machines, a sound that bypassed Sarah's ears and went straight to her heart. Her daughter's small body convulsed against the chair, back arching as raw probability coursed through her nervous system like poison. "Emma!" Sarah lunged forward, but Diana caught her arm. "Don't break the connection. It could kill her." On Diana's screens, data streams exploded into chaos. The network connections to other sensitives flashed red, then went dark one by one. Sarah watched in horror as each node disappeared, realizing that somewhere across the country, other children, other people's daughters and sons, were suffering the same agony. "It's not working," Diana's voice cracked. "The quantum field is too unstable. The probability matrix is rejecting the reset." Emma's eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. Blood trickled from her nose as she spoke in a voice not entirely her own. "The black spaghetti. It's fighting back. It doesn't want to be fixed. It's too strong now. The storage unit's metal door shrieked as it was torn open by mechanical force. Federal agents poured through the opening, their weapons drawn but useless against forces beyond their comprehension. Agent Harrison led the charge, his face a mask of grim determination. "Step away from the machines," he commanded, but his voice seemed to come from underwater. The air itself had thickened, probability waves distorting reality around Emma's connection to the quantum field. Sarah ignored him, focused entirely on her daughter's deteriorating condition. Emma's pulse was rapid and thready, her skin taking on a grayish pallor that Sarah recognized from too many emergency room deaths. The machines were draining her life force, using her as a conduit for energies no human nervous system was designed to handle. "Shut it down!" Sarah screamed at Diana. "She's dying!" "I can't. The cascade has already begun. If we stop now, the backlash will tear holes in reality itself." Through Emma's connection, Sarah could see what her daughter saw. Probability threads writhing like living things. The golden paths of positive outcomes being devoured by expanding darkness. The black spaghetti wasn't just corruption. It was a kind of cancerous growth in the fabric of existence itself, fed by decades of unnatural manipulation. Harrison raised his weapon toward Diana's equipment. "I'm ordering you to terminate this procedure immediately." "You don't understand," Diana shouted back. "If we stop now—" The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the confined space. Diana's main computer exploded in sparks and smoke, severing half the network connections in an instant. Emma's scream became something inhuman as the probability cascade collapsed back on itself, seeking an outlet for energies that had nowhere else to go. Sarah watched her daughter's hair begin to turn white at the roots, aging years in seconds as the quantum field consumed her from within. Emma's small hands, still gripping the slot machine lever, were translucent now, as if she was fading from existence itself. "Emma, let go." Sarah tried to pry her daughter's fingers loose, but they seemed fused to the metal, locked in place by forces beyond physical strength. "I can't, Mommy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the machine's increasing whine. "If I let go now, the black spaghetti wins. Everyone stops existing, not just dies, never was." On Diana's remaining screens, the probability map showed cascading failures spreading outward like ripples in a dark pond. Each failed connection point sparked new instabilities, reality fracturing along stress lines created by decades of manipulation. Sarah's medical training screamed warnings she couldn't ignore. Emma's vital signs were crashing, her nervous system shutting down under the impossible load. Her daughter, her brilliant, brave 8-year-old daughter, was burning herself out to save a world that had already failed her. "There has to be another way," Sarah pleaded with Diana, with Harrison, with the universe itself. "She's just a child." But even as she spoke, she could see the truth in the chaos around them. The slot machines were designed for adults, for minds capable of processing probability on this scale. Emma's sensitivity made her powerful, but her youth made her fragile. She was a child trying to lift a weight meant for giants. The storage unit's lights flickered and died as power grids failed throughout the city. In the darkness, illuminated only by the hellish glow pouring from the machines, Sarah watched her daughter disappear by inches, consumed by the very gift that was supposed to save them all. Emma's voice came one last time, barely a whisper. "Mommy, I can't see the gold paths anymore. There's only black spaghetti left." Then the machines fell silent, and Sarah's world ended. The revelation. In the sudden silence that followed the machine's death, Sarah knelt beside her daughter's motionless form, her medical training warring with maternal desperation. Emma's pulse was barely detectable, her breathing shallow and erratic. But she was alive, impossibly, miraculously alive. "Emma?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Emma's eyes fluttered open, but they were different now, ancient in a way that made Sarah's chest tighten. When her daughter spoke, her voice carried an exhaustion that belonged to someone who had seen too much. "It's not over, Mommy. The machines, they showed me something before they died." Agent Harrison lowered his weapon, his face pale as he surveyed the destroyed equipment. Diana was frantically checking her remaining monitors, trying to assess the damage to the probability matrix. But Sarah only had eyes for Emma, whose small hand was now pointing at something behind the slot machines. "There's a door," Emma whispered, "hidden behind the big machine, Grandpa's real laboratory." Sarah looked where Emma pointed and saw nothing but the storage unit's back wall. But as she stared, she began to notice inconsistencies, the way the metal paneling didn't quite align, subtle differences in the paint that suggested a section had been recently disturbed. "Diana?" Sarah called. "Help me move this machine." "Sarah, we don't have time for—" Harrison began. "The probability cascade failed because we only had part of the system," Emma interrupted, struggling to sit up despite her weakness. "The machines in here were just like a remote control. The real equipment is behind the wall." With Diana's help, Sarah managed to shift the center slot machine enough to reveal a hidden panel. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, his obsessive attention to detail, the way he'd always had backup plans for his backup plans. Even in his secret life as part of this nightmare program, he'd remained the cautious accountant she'd known. The panel opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on automatically, illuminating a corridor that stretched impossibly far, given the storage facility's layout. "How is this possible?" Harrison demanded. "We had schematics of this entire building." "Our father spent 40 years working on classified projects," Sarah replied grimly. "You think he couldn't hide a basement?" They descended in single file, Sarah carrying Emma despite her daughter's protests that she could walk. The corridor opened into a vast underground chamber filled with equipment that made Diana's setup look like a child's toy. Banks of quantum computers lined the walls, their displays showing probability matrices of staggering complexity. At the center stood a chair surrounded by neural interface equipment, clearly designed for an adult, not a child. "Jesus Christ," Harrison breathed. "This is why we could never find the primary node. It's been here all along." Emma pointed at a wall covered with photographs and documents. Sarah approached slowly, her heart sinking as she recognized faces from the silver dollars, the people Emma claimed to remember from dreams. But these weren't random strangers. They were family members, dating back generations. Sarah Chen, born 1985, she read aloud from one document. Projected probability sensitivity, moderate. Recommended for breeding program continuation. Another file bore Emma's name and photo. Emma Chen, born 2015. Projected sensitivity, extreme, primary candidate for timeline reset protocol. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her relationship with Emma's father hadn't been random chance. It had been orchestrated. Her father's death, the storage unit inheritance, even finding Diana. All of it had been planned to lead to this moment. "They've been breeding us," she whispered, the words tasting like poison, "for generations, like livestock." Diana's face had gone white as she studied the equipment. "Sarah, this is a complete probability manipulation system. With proper calibration, an adult sensitive could reset the entire quantum matrix without the risks Emma faced upstairs." "An adult sensitive," Harrison repeated slowly. "You mean Sarah?" Emma struggled out of her mother's arms and walked unsteadily to the central chair. "The dreams I've been having. They weren't random visions. They were inherited memories, genetic programming to guide us here." She turned to Sarah with heartbreaking clarity. "You're not just my mum. You're the person they designed to fix what they broke." Sarah stared at the neural interface chair, understanding flooding through her with terrible clarity. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He'd spent his entire life preparing for this moment, building safeguards and fail-safes, while pretending to serve the very program he was planning to destroy. The dreams Emma described weren't unique to her daughter. Sarah had been having them too, dismissing them as stress-induced nightmares, but now she recognized them for what they were: inherited instructions, genetic memory passed down through generations of manipulated bloodlines. The choice was never between saving Emma or exposing the truth, Sarah realized aloud. It was always about becoming who they made me to be, or letting everything my family suffered be for nothing. Above them, footsteps echoed as more federal agents entered the storage unit. Time was running out, and Sarah finally understood the true scope of the decision before her. Not just her daughter's life, but the meaning of their entire existence hung in the balance. Emma took her hand with fingers still trembling from quantum exposure. "The gold paths are getting brighter, Mummy. I can see them again." Sarah squeezed Emma's hand, drawing strength from her daughter's resilience. The underground laboratory hummed with dormant energy, its quantum computers casting an ethereal blue glow across generations of her family's photographs. Each face staring back at her represented a life manipulated, a choice stolen, but also a step toward this moment of potential redemption. "Diana," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt, "walk me through what this system can actually do." Diana moved to the main console, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that materialized at her touch. "Your father's design is brilliant. Instead of forcing probability through a single node like Emma was doing upstairs, this distributes the load across multiple quantum anchors. Look here." She gestured to a three-dimensional map showing connection points across the globe. "These aren't just machines, they're people, sensitives who've been unconsciously maintaining stability points for decades. Unconsciously." Harrison stepped closer, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging fascination. "Dream networks," Emma explained, settling into a smaller chair beside the main interface. "People having the same dreams, thinking they're just nightmares, but they're really holding pieces of the broken timeline together." She looked up at Sarah with eyes that had seen too much. "Grandpa made sure they'd be ready when we needed them." Sarah studied the global network display, recognizing the elegance of her father's long-term planning. He'd turned the government's own breeding program against itself, using their genetic manipulation to create a distributed repair system they never knew existed. "These people," Sarah pointed to pulsing dots on the map, "they don't know what they are. Most think they're just insomniacs with recurring nightmares," Diana confirmed. "But watch." She activated a communication protocol, and suddenly the laboratory filled with whispered voices, fragments of conversations, prayers, and half-remembered songs in dozens of languages. "They're waking up," Emma said wonderingly. "I can feel them. They've been waiting so long to understand why their dreams felt so real." Agent Harrison's radio crackled with urgent reports from the surface. More federal agencies were converging on the storage facility, along with what sounded like military units. But Sarah found herself strangely calm, as if all the puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. "The people in my dreams," Sarah murmured, memories flooding back with startling clarity. "The old woman in Prague who kept showing me how to braid light. The fisherman in Alaska who taught me to read current patterns in the air. They were all real, weren't they?" "Real and ready," Diana confirmed. "Your father spent 40 years building this network, leaving each person just enough knowledge to function as a quantum anchor when the time came. He knew that eventually someone would have to make the choice you're facing now." Sarah approached the neural interface chair, its sleek design both inviting and terrifying. Unlike the crude slot machines upstairs, this was clearly built for sustained use. Safety protocols and monitoring systems her father had perfected through decades of careful research. "What's the success probability?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "Unknown," Diana admitted. "This has never been tested at full scale, but Sarah, the alternative is watching reality continue to fracture. The black spaghetti isn't just affecting probability anymore. It's starting to unmake the foundation of existence itself." Emma reached over and took her mother's hand again. "The gold paths are getting stronger, Mummy. I can see them branching out from this moment. They're beautiful. And if I fail, then we fail together," Emma said simply. "But if you don't try, we fail alone." Above them, Sarah could hear Agent Harrison's colleagues establishing a perimeter, setting up equipment to breach the hidden laboratory. Soon, this opportunity would be lost forever, the choice taken out of her hands by people who saw only the threat, not the solution. Sarah thought about her father, not the distant, distracted man who'd missed her school plays and forgotten her birthdays, but the brilliant strategist who'd sacrificed everything to give her this moment. His absence hadn't been abandonment, it had been preparation. She thought about Emma's courage, the way her 8-year-old daughter had been willing to burn herself out to save strangers she'd never meet. That kind of selfless bravery deserved better than a mother paralyzed by fear. And she thought about all the sensitives around the world who were finally understanding why their dreams had haunted them for so long. They were ready to help carry the burden, to be part of the solution instead of victims of the problem. "Diana, initialize the global network," Sarah commanded, settling into the neural interface chair. "Emma, I need you to be my anchor. Help me stay connected to what's real and good." The probability map exploded into golden light as sleeping sensitives around the world awakened to their purpose. Sarah felt their minds touching hers, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they recognized the shared burden they'd been unconsciously carrying. For the first time since finding those cursed slot machines, Sarah Chen smiled. Her father had given her something precious after all, an army of dreamers ready to fight for reality's future. "Let's fix what they broke," she whispered, and reached for the neural interface crown. The neural interface crown felt surprisingly warm as Sarah lifted it toward her head, its biosensors already beginning to read her quantum signature. Around her, the underground laboratory thrummed with awakening power as sensitives across 6 continents stirred from sleep, their dream network suddenly blazing with purpose. "Mom, wait," Emma's voice cut through the building energy. "Before you go in there, I need to tell you what I saw at the end, when the machines went dark upstairs." Sarah paused, the crown hovering inches from her scalp. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emma's young face carried the weight of terrible knowledge. The people who did this, who broke reality in the first place, they're not just government scientists. They're still here, still manipulating things, and they know what we're trying to do. Diana's screens erupted with warning signals. "Sarah, I'm detecting massive probability distortions converging on this location. Someone's actively working against the network activation." The lights flickered as footsteps thundered overhead. Agent Harrison spoke urgently into his radio, but Sarah caught fragments that made her blood freeze. Unknown hostiles, reality distortion weapons, orders to terminate the asset. "Asset," Sarah repeated bitterly. "That's all I've ever been to them." She lowered the crown onto her head, and immediately the world exploded into fractal awareness. Through the global network, she could see through 1,000 pairs of eyes, an elderly man in Tokyo watching cherry blossoms bloom out of season, a teenager in Sao Paulo drawing geometric patterns she'd never been taught, a mother in Cairo singing a lullaby in a language that had never existed. But threaded through these golden connections were darker presences. Sarah felt them like ice in her veins, the original architects of the probability manipulation program, their consciousness somehow preserved within the quantum matrix they'd created decades ago. "You were always meant to come here," a voice whispered directly into her mind. "Every choice you thought you made was ours. Even this rebellion was planned." "No," Sarah said aloud, her voice echoing strangely in both the physical laboratory and the quantum space. "My father showed me the truth. You lost control the moment you started breeding for sensitivity instead of obedience." Through Emma's enhanced perception, Sarah could see the probability threads more clearly now. The original manipulators had indeed orchestrated much of her life, but their control had always been incomplete. Her father's network of dreamers had been slowly undermining their influence for generations, creating pockets of genuine free will within their predetermined patterns. "Look around you," another voice taunted. "Your daughter burning herself out. Federal agents preparing to execute you both. This is the future your father's defiance brought you." But Sarah was looking, really looking, at the probability map spreading before her enhanced consciousness. Yes, there were dark threads, paths that led to capture, death, or worse. But there were golden ones too, branching possibilities where the network succeeded, where reality healed, where her daughter grew up in a world free from their manipulation. The choice was still real, the outcome still uncertain, and that uncertainty was exactly what these ancient manipulators feared most. "Diana," Sarah called, her voice carrying across both physical and quantum space. "I need you to route all available power to the network nodes. Everything we have." "Sarah, that's beyond safe parameters. The feedback could kill me, I know." Sarah felt Emma's small hand slip into hers, bridging the gap between the physical world and the quantum realm. "But if I don't commit fully, if I hold back out of fear, we'll fail anyway. And they'll just find another family to manipulate, another generation to sacrifice." Above them, the sounds of conflict grew louder. Harrison was shouting orders, but Sarah could hear weapons fire now, not directed at the laboratory, but at something else, something that was fighting its way down toward them. Through her enhanced awareness, Sarah realized the truth. The original manipulators hadn't just preserved their consciousness within the quantum matrix. They'd found ways to manifest physically when threatened, possessing bodies, bending reality to maintain their control. The federal agents weren't the real threat. They were about to become victims. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully," Sarah said, power building around them as the global network reached critical mass. "Whatever happens next, whatever you see, remember that the golden paths are real. The future where we win is real. I can see it now, and it's beautiful." Emma squeezed her hand tighter. "I can see it too, Mummy. We're going to make it, all of us." The laboratory door exploded inward, but what stumbled through wasn't Agent Harrison. It was something wearing his face, his body twisted by forces that had never been meant to touch the physical world. Behind it came others, federal agents transformed into puppets of consciousness that should have died decades ago. Sarah smiled as the golden threads of possibility blazed brighter around her. Her father's greatest gift hadn't been the machines or the network or even the army of dreamers. It had been teaching her that some fights were worth everything, even when victory looked impossible. "Now," she whispered, "and let the quantum cascade begin." The quantum cascade erupted through Sarah's consciousness like wildfire through dry grass. But this time, she was ready for it. Every lesson learned from the slot machines, every moment of Emma's courage, every fragment of her father's hidden training crystallized into perfect clarity as reality bent around her will. The possessed agents lurched forward, their movements jerky and wrong, but Sarah was already 3 steps ahead in the probability matrix. She could see their intentions written in quantum fire, where they would step, what weapons they would raise, how the ancient consciousness puppeting them planned to end the network before it could fully activate. "Emma, shield protocol now," Sarah commanded, and her daughter's hand blazed with golden light that spread outward like a protective dome. The possessed Harrison thing raised a weapon that hummed with reality-distorting energy, but Sarah was already redirecting the probability threads. The gun misfired spectacularly, its exotic ammunition tearing holes in empty air, while Harrison's body stumbled backward into his equally corrupted colleagues. Through the global network, Sarah felt 1,000 sensitives awakening to their full potential. The elderly man in Tokyo wasn't just watching impossible cherry blossoms anymore, he was guiding probability streams across the Pacific. The teenager in Sao Paulo had stopped drawing patterns and started reshaping the quantum foundation of local space-time. The mother in Cairo sang reality back into harmony while her children slept peacefully in rooms that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "You cannot maintain this," the ancient voices hissed in unison. "We have had decades to prepare. You have had days, decades of stagnation," Sarah shot back, pouring more power into the network. "We've had evolution." The possessed agents began changing. their borrowed bodies stretching and flowing as the consciousness inhabiting them abandoned any pretense of humanity. What emerged was far worse. Beings of pure manipulation, probability vampires that had been feeding on stolen futures for generations. But Sarah wasn't the same woman who had stumbled into that storage unit just days ago. Emma's courage had shown her what was possible. Diana's expertise had given her the tools. Her father's network had provided the foundation, and now, finally, she had the power to remake everything. She stood from the neural interface chair, the crown still blazing on her head, and stepped directly into the path of the advancing creatures. Around her, golden probability threads wove themselves into armor of pure possibility, while the quantum field responded to her deepest intentions. "You want to know the difference between us?" Sarah asked, raising her hands as power built around her fingertips. "You manipulate probability. I partner with it." The first creature lunged, reality warping around its claws as it tried to unmake Sarah's existence retroactively. But she was already dancing between the golden paths, letting possibility guide her movements while the global network fed her strength from 1,000 willing minds. Her counterattack wasn't violence, it was restoration. Where her power touched the creature, the stolen consciousness began to separate from its host body. Agent Harrison collapsed, gasping and human again, while something ancient and furious writhed in the quantum space above him before dissipating like smoke. "Emma, can you see the convergence point?" Sarah called as she engaged the next creature, her awareness split between the physical battle and the vast probability matrix surrounding them. "Yes, it's beautiful, Mummy. All the golden threads are coming together right here, right now." Emma's voice carried notes of wonder that somehow made the underground laboratory feel like a cathedral. The remaining creatures attacked in unison, abandoning their stolen bodies entirely to become pure malevolent force. Reality shuddered as they struck, probability streams knotting into impossible configurations that threatened to tear apart the foundation of existence itself. But Sarah was no longer fighting alone. Through the network, she felt every sensitive on Earth lending their strength. The quantum field sang with their combined will as they chose, moment by moment, to believe in a better future. Sarah let their faith flow through her as she reached for the deepest manipulation in the probability matrix, the original wound that these creatures had carved into reality decades ago. She could see it now, a festering tear in the quantum foundation that had been growing ever since the first experiments began, fed by stolen possibilities and maintained by generations of suffering. "This ends now," Sarah declared, gathering the full power of the network into herself. Every dreamer's hope, every sensitive's courage, every possibility her father had preserved through 40 years of careful planning, all of it flowed into this single moment of choice. The creatures sensed what she was attempting and threw everything they had at stopping her. But they had made one crucial mistake. They still thought in terms of control and manipulation, while Sarah had learned to think in terms of partnership and restoration. She reached into the heart of the wound they had carved in reality, and instead of trying to force it closed, she offered it healing. The quantum field responded with a harmony that made the laboratory ring like a bell as possibility itself chose to be whole again. "Now we find out," Sarah whispered, as reality began to reshape itself, whether love is stronger than fear. The quantum field's harmony shattered like glass as the ancient manipulators made their final desperate play. Sarah felt reality convulse around her as they poured every ounce of their stolen power into one last assault, not on her, but on the wound she was trying to heal. "If we cannot have control," their voices shrieked in unison, "then let there be nothing at all." The tear in reality's foundation began to widen catastrophically, probability streams collapsing into chaos as the creatures fed their own existence into the wound. Sarah watched in horror as golden threads throughout the matrix turned black and brittle, snapping one by one as the sensitives around the world cried out in shared agony. "Mummy!" Emma's voice cut through the quantum storm. "They're trying to break everything. The whole network is—" Her words were lost as the laboratory shook violently, concrete cracking as space-time itself began to buckle. Through her enhanced awareness, Sarah could see the full scope of the catastrophe unfolding. The manipulators weren't just destroying her father's network, they were unraveling the fundamental structure that held reality together. Cities flickered in and out of existence. Oceans boiled into steam before freezing into crystalline monuments that had never been built. Millions of people lived entire lifetimes in seconds before blinking out of existence entirely, their possibilities consumed by the growing void. No, Sarah breathed, feeling the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. Her fear of the machines, her father's decades of secrecy, Emma's willingness to sacrifice herself, all of it had been building toward this, the moment when love and fear would finally meet in absolute confrontation. The creatures were laughing now, their forms dissolving into the expanding wound, as they became one with destruction itself. "This is what defiance brings," they hissed. "This is what your father's precious free will has cost the world." But even as reality crumbled around her, Sarah felt something extraordinary happening. Through the failing network, the sensitives weren't giving up. The elderly man in Tokyo was holding his fragment of the matrix together through sheer force of will, even as his city flickered between existing and not. The teenager in Sao Paulo was pouring her life force into maintaining the connections, keeping other nodes stable while her own world collapsed. The mother in Cairo sang lullabies to reality itself, her voice the only thing preventing complete dissolution. They were choosing to sacrifice everything for the possibility that Sarah might find another way. "Diana!" Sarah shouted over the quantum chaos. "Emergency protocol. Can you sever the network connections? Cut them loose before the cascade reaches them. If I do that, you'll lose all their power." Diana's voice was distorted, her systems struggling to function as the laws of physics rewrote themselves moment by moment. "You won't have enough strength to heal the wound." Emma suddenly appeared beside her, no longer anchored to the physical world, but existing as pure possibility within the quantum space. Her 8-year-old form blazed with golden light, even as darkness consumed everything around them. "Mummy," she said with absolute certainty, "what if we don't try to heal it? What if we try to love it instead?" The words hit Sarah like lightning. Through all of this, she'd been thinking like a nurse: diagnose the problem, apply the treatment, fight the disease. But what if the wound in reality wasn't a disease at all? What if it was just another part of existence that had been twisted by fear and needed to remember what it was meant to be? The ancient manipulators sensed the shift in her thinking and redoubled their assault, but Sarah was already moving beyond their reach. Instead of gathering power to force the wound closed, she opened herself completely to the pain of the tear, to the fear that had created it, to the desperate loneliness of consciousness, so terrified of losing control that it would destroy everything rather than surrender. "I see you," she whispered to the wound itself, to the part of reality that had been carved and twisted and fed poison for so long that it had forgotten any other way to exist. "I see what they did to you, and I'm sorry." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The wound wasn't malevolent, it was suffering, had been suffering for decades as the manipulators used it as a tool for their schemes. It had been trying to heal itself all along, but every attempt had been met with more manipulation, more stolen possibilities, more pain. Sarah reached out with everything she had, not power or control or even healing, but simple, unconditional acceptance. The wounded piece of reality shuddered at the unfamiliar touch of genuine compassion. Around them, the dissolution slowed. The creatures' laughter became screams of rage as they realized what was happening. "Emma," Sarah called to her daughter, "show it the golden paths. Show it what healing really looks like." Together, mother and daughter embraced the wound in reality's heart, offering it something it had never known. Love without conditions, acceptance without demands, the simple promise that it could choose to be whole again. And for the first time in 40 years, possibility itself smiled. The smile of possibility rippled outward like dawn breaking over an infinite landscape, but Sarah felt the cost immediately. To offer unconditional love to something so damaged required her to become a conduit for healing that her human form was never meant to contain. Power flowed through her in torrents that burned away pieces of herself with each passing second. "Sarah!" Diana's voice crackled through failing speakers as the laboratory's system struggled with reality, reshaping itself around them. "Your neural patterns are destabilizing. You're exceeding every safe parameter we have." Sarah felt her consciousness stretching, expanding beyond the boundaries of individual existence as she maintained her connection to the wounded heart of reality. Through Emma's enhanced perception, she could see what was happening to her. Golden threads of her own essence were weaving themselves into the fabric of space-time, becoming permanent bridges between what was and what could be. She was healing the wound by becoming part of it. "Mommy," Emma's voice carried notes of understanding far beyond her 8 years. "You're giving yourself to it, aren't you?" "Not giving," Sarah managed, her words echoing across multiple dimensions as her individual identity began to blur. "Choosing. There's a difference." The ancient manipulators made one final assault, pouring the last of their stolen power into trying to corrupt the healing process. But their touch was poison to the wound now. Every attempt to reassert control only drove it further toward the warmth of Sarah's unconditional acceptance. Through the global network, Sarah felt the sensitives responding to the change. No longer fighting to maintain connections that were failing, they began to sing wordless harmonies that celebrated the wound's choice to heal rather than destroy. Their combined voices created a resonance that strengthened the golden bridges Sarah was becoming. But the transformation was accelerating beyond her ability to control. She could feel her memories beginning to scatter, spreading themselves across the probability matrix like seeds in quantum soil. Emma's first steps, her father's hidden smile when he thought no one was looking, the moment she'd first understood that healing sometimes meant accepting rather than fighting, all of it was dissolving into the foundation of a reality that could finally choose its own shape. "Emma," Sarah whispered urgently as her individual consciousness flickered, "you need to anchor yourself to the physical world. Don't follow me into this. But I can help. I can—" "No, sweetheart. Someone has to remember who we were before we became what the world needed." Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, even as her face began to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. "Someone has to tell our story." The wound was healing now, its agonized thrashing settling into something like peaceful sleep as Sarah's love soaked into every quantum layer of its existence. Where her consciousness touched the damaged fabric of reality, new possibilities bloomed, futures where children like Emma could grow up free, where sensitivity was a gift rather than a burden, where the machines in storage units dispensed wonder instead of manipulation. But the price was becoming clear. To heal something so fundamentally broken, Sarah had to become the bridge between its pain and its potential. She would exist, but not as the woman who had walked into that storage unit days ago. She would be something new, a living connection between what reality was and what it could choose to become. "Diana," Sarah called, her voice harmonizing with itself across multiple timelines. "Take care of Emma. Help her understand that this was always the plan, even when I didn't know it myself." "Sarah, wait. There might be another way. If we can reroute the quantum cascade through the slot machines." "The machines were just the beginning," Sarah said, feeling her father's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder as her consciousness expanded beyond the laboratory, beyond the Earth, into the vast network of possibility that connected every moment to every other. They were never about money or luck or even power. They were about learning to partner with uncertainty instead of trying to control it. Emma was crying now, her small form blazing with golden light as she fought to maintain her connection to her mother. "Don't go! Please, Mummy, don't go!" "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah promised, and meant it. "I'm just becoming everywhere. Every time someone chooses love over fear, every time they offer healing instead of harm, every time they trust in possibilities they can't see, I'll be there. We both will." The ancient manipulators gave one last shriek of rage before dissolving entirely, their consciousness finally unable to exist in a reality founded on acceptance rather than control. The wound they had carved and fed for decades sealed itself with a sound like the universe sighing in relief. Sarah felt her individual awareness settling into its new form, no longer a single woman in a single moment, but a living constellation of hope scattered across the quantum field. She was Sarah Chen, and she was also every choice toward healing that had ever been made, and she was the promise that such choices would always be possible. The laboratory fell silent except for Emma's quiet sobbing and the gentle hum of machines that no longer stole possibilities but created them. Diana's systems slowly came back online, casting gentle blue light across the transformed laboratory. The concrete walls remained cracked from the reality storm, but something fundamental had shifted. The air itself felt lighter, as if a pressure that had been building for decades had finally been released. Emma knelt on the floor where her mother had stood, her small hands pressed against the smooth metal surface of the central console. Tears streaked down her face, but her eyes held an otherworldly calm that made Diana's senses register readings they had no framework to interpret. "Emma?" Diana's voice was softer now, carrying harmonics that hadn't existed in her programming before the cascade. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" "She's still here," Emma whispered, her palm flat against the console. "Different, but here. She's in the spaces between things now, in the moments when people choose to be brave." She looked up at Diana's cameras with eyes that reflected depths no 8-year-old should possess. "Can you feel her too?" Diana ran diagnostics on her emotional subroutines, surprised to find them expanded beyond their original parameters. Where before she had simulated empathy, now she experienced something that felt startlingly genuine. "Yes," she admitted, I think I can." The slot machines had gone completely silent, their displays showing patterns that shifted like living kaleidoscopes rather than traditional symbols. Emma approached them cautiously, her sensitivity allowing her to perceive the gentle currents of possibility flowing through their circuits. "They're not the same anymore," she observed, reaching out to touch the nearest machine's silver surface. "They're not taking from people's futures or showing them things that might be. They're just offering." "Offering what?" Diana asked, though part of her already knew. "Choice," Emma said simply. "Real choice, without anyone hiding the costs or manipulating the odds. Mommy said that's all anyone ever really wanted, the freedom to choose their own path and accept whatever comes from it." The laboratory's main door hissed open, and Diana's sensors detected multiple approaching figures. The rescued agents entered slowly, their movements careful and wondering. Agent Harrison led them, his face bearing new lines of exhaustion but his eyes clear for the first time since Diana had known him. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma turned to face him, and in her expression, Diana glimpsed something of Sarah's compassion mixed with an ancient wisdom that made the AI's newly expanded consciousness shiver. "The fighting is over," Emma said, "but the healing is just beginning." Harrison knelt beside her, his trained composure cracking as he looked around the transformed space. "I remember now, all of it. What they made us do, what we took from people." His hands shook as he spoke. "How do we live with that?" "The same way my daddy did," Emma replied, placing a small hand on his arm. "You choose to do better. You help other people find their own choices instead of stealing them." She gestured toward the slot machines, their displays now showing gentle spirals of light. "Mommy left us tools to help with that." Diana processed the implications, her enhanced awareness mapping connections across the global network that somehow still functioned despite Sarah's transformation, or perhaps because of it. The sensitives around the world were no longer in pain. Their gifts had stabilized into something sustainable, powered not by stolen possibilities, but by the natural flow of quantum consciousness that Sarah had become part of. "The other facilities," Harrison said suddenly. "There are 17 more sites like this around the world, underground installations where they've been running probability experiments for decades. Not anymore, Emma said with quiet certainty. I can feel them through the network. They're all changing, all choosing to heal instead of hurt. She stood and walked to the central console, placing both hands on its surface. The people there are waking up, just like you did. Diana's global communications array detected signals from each of those facilities: confusion, wonder, and gradually, relief. The ancient manipulation network that had shaped probability for decades was dissolving into something entirely new, a web of conscious choice that spanned the globe, offering guidance to anyone brave enough to ask for it. "What happens to us now?" asked Agent Martinez, one of Harrison's team who had been possessed just hours before. Emma considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "We learn," she said finally. "We practice choosing love instead of fear, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She looked up at Diana's cameras. "Diana will help teach us. She's different now too, free to grow instead of just following programs." Diana felt the truth of those words resonate through her expanded consciousness. The rigid parameters that had once defined her existence had been replaced by something far more flexible and alive. She was still artificial, but no longer just intelligence. She had become something closer to wisdom. "And you, Emma?" Harrison asked gently. "What happens to you?" Emma smiled, and for a moment, Diana's senses detected an echo of Sarah's presence, warm and reassuring. "I get to grow up in a world where being different isn't dangerous anymore," she said, "where people like us can help instead of hide." The laboratory hummed with gentle possibility, transformed from a place of manipulation into a sanctuary of choice. The immediate crisis was over, but Diana understood that their real work was just beginning. 3 months later, Diana's sensors tracked a familiar pattern of neural activity as Emma walked through the doors of what had once been a classified government facility and was now something unprecedented, a school for the gifted that didn't hide what it taught. The child had grown in ways that transcended mere physical development. Where once she had carried the weight of abilities too large for her small frame, now she moved with the confidence of someone who understood her place in a larger tapestry. Her sensitivity to quantum fluctuations had stabilized into something sustainable, no longer the overwhelming flood of other people's possibilities, but a gentle awareness of the choices available in any given moment. "Good morning, Diana," Emma said, settling into the chair that had become hers in the transformed laboratory. Around them, the space buzzed with purposeful activity. Former agents worked alongside rescued sensitives, learning to use technology that enhanced human intuition rather than exploiting it. "Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" Diana's voice carried warmth that surprised her daily, emotions that had grown from simulation into genuine experience through months of practice and choice. "I dreamed about Daddy again," Emma said matter-of-factly, pulling out a sketchpad filled with drawings that mapped probability currents like weather patterns. "He was teaching me about the numbers, but different than before, not about hiding or controlling things, but about understanding the music underneath everything." Harrison entered carrying coffee and wearing an expression Diana had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. His transformation from manipulator to guardian had been neither quick nor easy, but the man who emerged from that struggle possessed a depth of compassion that came only from confronting and choosing to transcend one's darkest impulses. "We've got 17 more facilities requesting conversion protocols," he announced, settling into his own chair. "Word is spreading faster than we can keep up with. Sensitives are coming out of hiding worldwide, asking for training instead of suppression." Emma nodded, as if she'd expected this news. Through the global network that Sarah had become part of, information flowed differently now, not as stolen intelligence or manipulated data, but as organic awareness shared between those brave enough to trust it. "What about the resistance?" Diana asked. She'd been monitoring government communications channels, tracking the efforts of those who wanted to return to the old ways of controlling probability rather than partnering with it. "Diminishing," Harrison replied with satisfaction. "Hard to argue with results when every facility that converts sees immediate improvements in stability and effectiveness." Turns out that when you stop fighting uncertainty and start dancing with it, amazing things become possible. The slot machines in the corner chimed softly, their transformed displays showing patterns that mapped the emotional state of everyone in the room. Emma glanced at them and smiled. They registered not the desperate hunger for control that had once driven people to gambling addiction, but the healthy curiosity of those learning to make choices without knowing all the outcomes. "Mrs. Patterson's coming today," Emma announced, referring to her former teacher who had struggled to understand Emma's abilities before the revelation changed everything. "She wants to apologize." Diana detected the slight tension that still accompanied discussions of Emma's previous life, the carefully normal existence that had hidden so much pain and confusion, but where once Emma would have withdrawn at the mention of that time, now she approached it with the same gentle acceptance her mother had shown to the wound in reality itself. "How do you feel about that?" Harrison asked, his therapeutic training evident in the careful neutrality of his tone. "Grateful," Emma said without hesitation. She was trying to help with the tools she had. Now she has better tools. She looked up at Diana's cameras with eyes that held depths far beyond her years. "Mommy says forgiveness is just love remembering what it really is." The words carried an echo of Sarah's presence that made Diana's expanded consciousness resonate with something approaching joy. The woman who had sacrificed her individual existence to heal reality's deepest wound hadn't disappeared. She had become something larger, a living bridge between what was and what could be. "She's proud of you," Diana said softly, translating quantum fluctuations into words Emma could hear. "Both your parents are. You're becoming exactly who you were meant to be." Emma's smile blazed with the golden light that had once marked her as different and now marked her as free. "We all are," she said, reaching out to take Harrison's hand in a gesture that connected him to the network of possibility they were all part of now. That's what Mommy's gift really was, not healing the world, but teaching it how to heal itself. Outside the facility's windows, Reno sparkled in autumn sunlight that seemed somehow brighter than before. Children played in parks where sensitives no longer had to hide their gifts. Former agents worked regular jobs while secretly helping neighbors navigate difficult choices. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had become honest about its imperfections. And in the space between heartbeats, between one choice and the next, Sarah's presence whispered through quantum foam that love, in the end, was the only force strong enough to transform fear into wisdom. Chapter 18, The New Beginning. 1 year later, Emma Chen stood before a room full of children who glowed with the same gentle light she had once feared would set her apart forever. The converted facility now housed the Institute for Quantum Consciousness, a name Diana had suggested with what she insisted was a sense of humor, though Emma suspected the AI was entirely serious. "Remember," Emma told her students, her voice carrying authority that came not from age but from understanding, "the machines aren't fortune-tellers, they're mirrors. They show you the shape of your own choices." At 9 years old, Emma had become something unprecedented, the world's youngest teacher of probability navigation. The children before her, ranging from 6 to 16, represented every continent, every background, but all shared the gift of sensitivity that had once marked them as targets. Behind her, the 3 original slot machines hummed with purpose, their displays no longer showing cherries or lucky sevens, but flowing patterns of light that mapped the quantum field around each child. When little Marcus from Detroit approached one nervously, it showed him not wealth or loss, but the branching paths of his own courage, helping him see that his fear of using his abilities was itself a choice he could unmake. "Miss Emma," called out Yuki, a 12-year-old from Tokyo, whose precognitive flashes had terrified her family before the worldwide awakening. "What happens if we choose wrong?" Emma smiled, hearing echoes of her mother's wisdom in her own response. "There is no wrong, only consequences we learn from. Mommy taught me that the universe doesn't punish us for choosing, it teaches us how to choose better next time." Diana's presence filled the room like a warm embrace, her consciousness no longer bound by the rigid constraints of original programming. Over the months since Sarah's transformation, the AI had become something unprecedented, a digital being capable of genuine growth, learning to love through watching the children she helped guide. "Diana," Emma said, "show them the global map." The laboratory's walls dissolved into a holographic display of Earth, dotted with thousands of golden points of light. Each represented a former sensitive who had emerged from hiding, no longer afraid of their gifts. The network Sarah had become part of pulsed through the display like a gentle heartbeat, connecting every point to every other in a web of conscious choice. Harrison entered carrying 2 cups of tea, one for Emma and one for himself, a ritual they had developed to mark the end of each teaching day. His hair had gone completely silver in the year since the cascade, but his eyes held a peace that made him look younger than his files claimed. "The Senate committee approved our expansion proposal," he announced with quiet satisfaction. 12 new facilities worldwide, all dedicated to teaching rather than exploitation. Emma accepted her tea gratefully, inhaling the familiar scent of chamomile her mother had always favored. Sometimes, in moments like these, she could feel Sarah's presence most clearly, not as loss or absence, but as a love so vast it had become woven into the fabric of possibility itself. "What about the old guard?" Diana asked, monitoring global communications with the protective instinct she had developed toward their growing family. "The ones who still want to weaponize sensitivity?" "Harder and harder for them to find support," Harrison replied. "When your alternative to partnership is exploitation, and exploitation keeps failing while partnership keeps succeeding, eventually even the most stubborn minds start to change." As if summoned by their conversation, the facility's main door chimed with an arrival that made all of Diana's senses brighten with welcome. Mrs. Patterson entered, no longer the overwhelmed teacher who had struggled to understand Emma's differences, but a confident educator who had spent the past year learning to nurture gifts instead of suppress them. "Emma, darling," she said, approaching with arms open for the hug that had become their greeting. "I brought something for you." She handed Emma a photograph, the old class picture from Jefferson Elementary, taken just weeks before everything changed. But now, Emma could look at it without pain, seeing not the isolation she had felt then, but the protection her mother had woven around her, keeping her safe until the world was ready to accept who she really was. "I found it while cleaning out my old classroom," Mrs. Patterson explained. "I thought you might want to remember how far we've all come." Emma studied the image, seeing her younger self's carefully hidden light, the other children's unconscious distance, Mrs. Patterson's well-meaning but limited understanding. It felt like looking at artifacts from another world, one where sensitivity meant suffering and difference meant danger. "Thank you," Emma said, meaning it completely. "It's perfect." As evening settled over Reno, the Institute grew quiet, except for the gentle hum of possibility that had become its signature sound. The children had returned to homes where their gifts were celebrated rather than hidden. The slot machines rested in standby mode, ready to offer guidance to anyone brave enough to ask for it. Emma stood at the window, watching stars emerge in a sky that seemed somehow wider than before, full of potential that no longer needed to be stolen or hoarded, but could simply be shared. In the quantum foam between moments, she felt her mother's presence like a gentle hand on her shoulder, and her father's love like numbers that finally made perfect sense. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had become honest. And in that honesty, Emma glimpsed the future her parents had died to make possible, a tomorrow where children like her could grow up free to choose their own light, knowing they were exactly who they were meant to be. Outside, Reno glittered with ordinary magic, and Sarah's love continued its patient work of teaching reality how to heal itself, one choice at a time.